Hi, everyone. I'm Greg Magruder on the board of the DC Environmental Film Festival. And as the festival celebrates its 30th anniversary, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this chat with 4 acclaimed filmmakers from past festivals who've contributed cinematic work on the subject of climate change and whose films have shaped the conversation on climate change and influenced audiences and minds. So to take a look at the far past, it appears that the first documentary film to ever mention climate change was a 1958 educational film series overseen by Frank Capra, of all people. Yes, that Frank Capra. The film is The Unchained Goddess. And while it's typical of films from the 50s, educational films from the 50s, those of you of a certain age know what I'm talking about. It was very prescient in talking about the effects of climate change. And you can find that film on YouTube. I invite all of you to take a look at it. We've come a long way in filmmaking since then. So let's meet some of our filmmakers, the 4 filmmakers whose current works focus on climate change and have been screened at the festival. First, I'd like to introduce to you and welcome Jennifer Baichwal. Jennifer was the director of Manufactured Landscapes, Act of God, and Anthropocene. Then we have James Balog. Jim is the founder of the Earth Vision Institute and the filmmaker for Chasing Ice and The Human Element. And Louie Psihoyos, director of the Cove, Race and Extinction, and The Game Changers. And finally, Lucy Walker, director of Wasteland, Countdown to Zero, and Bring Your Own Brigade. Lucy is in transit right now. You can see her on the screen. Her name is, she'll be joining us live shortly. So I think it's fitting to have this discussion in the wake of the report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that came out last week, whose main takeaway was that human-induced climate change is causing dangerous disruption in nature and affecting the lives of billions of people around the world, despite the efforts to reduce risk. The group's chair said that the report is a dire warning about the consequences of inaction, and that our efforts today will shape how people adapt and nature responds to increasing climate risk. So the first question I have for all of you is, what is your reaction to this report, and does it spur you to take any particular action in the area of filmmaking? So Jennifer, why don't you go first with that?
Well, my reaction to the report is kind of no kidding. Like we've all known that for a long time, and I feel like the message keeps getting reiterated and ignored, quite frankly. And so I would say that I was thinking about 2 really extraordinary women who I draw on for inspiration here. One of them is Dr. Courtney Howard, who talked about, we met at COP26, and she was talking about how more and more of her patients they have anxiety about climate. There's actually a category of anxiety that is the climate change anxiety. And you know what you do for patients like that. And she said, well, what we've been learning is that the prescription for climate anxiety is not medication, but action. And actually that activism even in your own small context is an antidote to that anxiety. So we all have to participate. And the other woman is Erica Chenoweth, who I'm sure you all know, Harvard professor, who basically did a study talking about how nonviolent resistance is the most effective way to change societies, governments, global communities. And she did this exhaustive study of social movements over the years and found that only 3.5% of the population is required to engage in nonviolent resistance in order to affect change. And I think about that, and it makes me hopeful for the possibilities of real mitigation, especially by those of us who are committed to working for this change, however possible.
And Jennifer, you said your response to this was no kidding, and that was kind of my response too. But given what you just told us about those two people and this thing that is still a problem, I mean, what do you think you as a filmmaker might do in response to that? Is there anything you can do that you're not doing?
Well, I mean, I will say that in the past, we've been criticized for our work, especially the work that we've done with Ed Bertinsky, for being too soft, like not hitting the issue hard enough, not making direct exhortations to the audience for change. And I think that the reason when I made Manufactured Landscapes, and that film kind of in a very quiet way opened up the eyes of many people to what industrialization looks like, what environmental devastation looks like, and how we are all responsible for that. And certainly we're all responsible for the Industrial Revolution in China. It felt like there was a place for that revelatory rather than accusatory approach. And we continued that with Watermark and Anthropocene. I kind of think that maybe that's not enough anymore. So I'm moving from that perspective into how do you do direct exhortation without terrifying people or basically just putting them into a state of despair and paralysis. I don't know the answer to that.
Well, that was an eloquent answer nevertheless. So Louie, how about you? Your response to that report and your response as a filmmaker?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody on this Zoom knows that film is one of the most powerful weapons in the world for social change. Yeah, I mean, it struck me that, okay, now we have this world consensus about it, and we have a time period, 10 years to combat it, to start to reverse it or mitigate it until it's, I won't say game over, but it's runaway climate change. So we started when we did Racing Extinction, we did these projection events on the United Nations and the Vatican and the Empire State Building, warning people about species extinction. So I started a business, it's called Projecting Change, and we're working with the United Nations to project on the east side of the Secretariat building. That's the 38-story building that sits proud on the East River. So September 10th of this year, we're doing a projection event, and with the New York skyline in the background, and it's all going to be around climate change. And so we know that if we do something really big and audacious, we can get world attention. On our previous projection events, I think we had 5.4 billion media views just in the English language. So we think that's going to be, an event that can start to change the conversation. And, I know it sounds Pollyanna that, somebody is listening and think, oh, well, filmmakers think they can change the world. But, when we did Game Changers, Merrill Lynch did a study that said that since 2004, even though that the Game Changers has only been out 3 years, 75% of the interest in a plant-based diet since 2004, 75% of the interest has come about because of that film. And that's it's a pretty huge order, but we're really changing the world with the film. And it's and what I'm trying to do is I try to figure out, well, what what Jennifer was saying is that, yeah, you don't want to create despair, you want to create action. But the easiest way that you can do something personally, if you want to change the world, change what's on your plate. Switching to a whole foods plant-based diet, it's better for your own health, it's better for animal health, better for the wild, it's better for clean air, everything. It's better for the planet. So I continue to think that film's going to be the way forward to getting billions of people to switch.
And Louie, I'm so glad you mentioned Game Changers, because some people do not or did not view that as a film about climate change. They thought it was a film about diet, but you know, you're so right. You want to change the world, change what's on your plate. And that
Yeah.
one,
You have to come through the back door sometimes, either, you know, through humor or some, you know, a way that people quite, you know, aren't quite expecting it. You know, you want to, you know, not tell people so much, but show people.
Okay. And Lucy, I know we can't see you, but if you can hear us and share your thoughts about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, you know, it's interesting to think that, you know, in a way, all my films are environmental, but very specific stories, you know, whether about cherry blossoms in Japan or about even, you know, my first film about Amish kids trying to decide what life they want, you know, that's actually an environmental decision. And Wasteland certainly is really obviously about the environment because it looks at people who recycle by hand in Brazil. And there's a film I made about nuclear weapons, Countdown to Zero, which is never a good week in the world when, you know, Countdown to Zero gets more Google alerts because unfortunately, of course, it's about nuclear weapons, and that comes to top of mind when we start worrying about security in the world as we are, you know, top of mind right now. And Bring Your Own Brigade, of course, looks at very close to home about climate change, close to home with the forest fires, particularly here in California, although it really pertains to around the world, and really looks at logging and the impacts of that. So I'm sort of always innately fascinated by this topic. I can't help myself. It's what has always preoccupied me. And I really do think that one has to hold hope to continue, you know, as a human being. And stories of inspiration are really powerful. I guess my job as an artist is for that inspiration never to feel unearned or cheesy or phony or a bull-faced lie, which it feels like there's sometimes pressure from less skillful quarters, or, you know, some people will make less skillful films that will kind of just give you some hope, you know, because that's what, you know, seems obviously needed. I think my job is to really, you know, look and reflect deeply on the world and find the truth, and truthfully, is there hope that we can find and feel, and that, yes, storytelling is the most powerful way I know in film to affect change. And even though my stories aren't as, you know, I'm a filmmaker and an artist, and I sort of like to follow stories and let that emotional engagement that the audience feels be what drives their change, rather than a kind of more direct call to action. Although my film Countdown to Zero was most certainly a direct call to action, and my film Bring Your Own Brigade was pretty, you know, it's most certainly the absolute most accurate and detailed analysis of what's going on with the wildfire crisis in the world, bar none, you know. So sometimes I do get a little bit more absolutely direct about things, but that's, even those films are character driven, you know, particularly Bring Your Own Brigade, you know, because I think that is how the medium works most effectively is through the emotional engagement through amazing characters and amazing stories with really strong narratives. So that is what I do, and I'm, you know, very I'm very convinced that it is through this narrative engagement that people really expand their circle of empathy and their knowledge. And I think about Steven Pinker's Better Angels of Our Nature, where he looks at narratives as a real engine of change. For example, there were early novels about enslaved people that apparently were, you know, really quite influential in the movement to abolish slavery, and you know, that these narratives can actually really have much needed impacts in the world. And I that's my experience, you know, that I've certainly expanded my empathy and knowledge. And I think something else to emphasize is that actually knowledge is, I think sometimes we really overestimate how much people understand, and documentary is a formative way. And I could shut up now because I know I'm not even on camera, but I really appreciate this conversation and these incredible people that you've gathered around, and thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Lucy. And well, Jim, so it's now your turn to your response to that IPCC report.
Well, everybody's already said everything. What do I have to say? No, those very eloquent, excellent comments. You know, I'm really struck listening to this, that there's actually a triad of forces here. And one is our cinematic or photographic storytelling. The other one is the science that you alluded to at the beginning. But there's a third force, which plays a part in all this. And I'll hold that thought for a second. I once heard an anthropologist say that Homo sapiens is defined in many ways by its interest and ability to tell stories and to seek patterns, that those are two salient characteristics of the species. And in storytelling, that's obviously what we're speaking about here, but the pattern seeking is science. In all of our works, in some manner, are founded on the science of the pattern seeking. The science, you know, we don't want to think about computer models and black box measurements, but basically the way that all of us are thinking about these issues is grounded on that. And we try and take that knowledge and that information that the science community has come up with and turn it into visual expression and storytelling expression. So that's all well and good, but all of us, scientists included, have another ally in this game, and the ally is nature itself. You know, we are participants in a great tsunami of change, and the intensity and power of how the world is changing really is the lead thing that's pushing this conversation forward in global society, especially in American society, where there's been so much denialism for so long. So there is this partnership between art and science and nature itself that's helping to unpack all of this and make it so much more credible, plausible, understandable, and actionable by the public. So, you know, we in our field do what we can to carry our load and our burden and do our pushing along. And these other forces are acting simultaneously. And it's all good. And it's all we can do. All you can do is what you can do with the tools that you have. That was sort of an odd syntax in that sentence, but you get the idea.
Now, all of those answers are really quite illuminating and wonderful. But let's talk now about your journey to becoming filmmakers. Jennifer, you alluded to this earlier, that you collaborate frequently with the photographer Ed Pertinsky, and some of your films have also been portraits, intimate portraits about the lives of artists. Jim, you and Louie both came to filmmaking after careers in photography, and that's how I initially knew you, both of you, at National Geographic, where I worked. And Lucy, you worked in theater, you even worked as a DJ, and even directed the children's TV show Blue's Clues. So how have all of you tapped into this wonderful variety in your careers to create so many award-winning in films on climate change? So Jennifer, why don't you go first?
Well, thank you. I started out as an academic, and I did a master's degree in philosophy and theology at McGill University, and I was headed towards a doctorate, and I sort of thought about how many people read my master's thesis. and that would probably be 4,
That
including
was on
Dad.
Reinhold Niebuhr, was that?
On Reinhold Niebuhr, yes. Reinhold Niebuhr's Conception of Sin as Pride. And it's like, okay, 4 people, including my dad, read that. So is there a more, and I'm one of those people. So then the outside reader, my advisor, and I kind of thought there's got to be a better way to explore these questions that I'm obsessed with, like, you know, questions of metaphysics and ethics and identity and, you know, and how do you do that in a way that moves people viscerally, emotionally, and intellectually at the same time? And that's how I turned to film. My first film, which is sort of deeply embarrassing, is called Looking You in the Back of the Head. And it's a question about personal identity. It asks 15 women to try to describe themselves, and they all have these different answers, like, my worst fear is that all my teeth fall out. You know, that was the answer to that question. And you think, well, that actually does say quite a lot about who you are, right? And yet it's impossible. It's impossible to be reductive in that way. Identity is fluid, it's ongoing, it's complex, right? And so I think what I learned is that complexity is not something to be afraid of. And in film especially, the tendency to have, or let's say the temptation to have pat answers or resolutions where everything gets tied up at the end. Well, none of our films do that, because life is not like that, and documentary is life. And I feel like, to your point, Jim, that combination of art and science, like with Anthropocene is not just a film, it's a traveling exhibition. It's a huge exhibition of Ed's photographs, our video installations, augmented reality. We did 360 VR as part of an educational program that's still going in Canada. And the exhibition is now traveling all around the world, and there's a couple of books. And I say that because that sort of felt to me like, where do I go from here? Like, I can't, that's probably the biggest, that was the hardest thing that all 3 of us, Ed, Nick, and myself, have ever done. And it took 5 years to do. And now I'm just sort of thinking about, you know, what my work will look like on the other side of Anthropocene. And I'm very committed. When I first started making that film, sorry to go on for so long, I immediately recognized that I had found my vocation, behind a camera, then editing and putting together visual language with, as Lucy says, knowledge and information and text. And somehow that combination and the myriad ways that those 2 things can combine still completely fascinates and compels me. So I'm not stopping. I'm just in an interesting state right now.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. And Jim, how about you? Your past as a photographer, the Extreme Eye Survey, how has that all come together in your filmmaking career?
Yeah, well, it's, you know, the past, what's the quote from Faulkner or somebody? The past isn't even past, it's still with us, or some such thing. The still photography is still with me. Yes, I started out as a still photographer, just like Jennifer. I actually was headed for a more academic career in the sciences, and I was finishing my master's degree in geomorphology, the study of landforms, and I was processing the information I collected in my field work on a stack of these vanilla colored punch cards, which one did back in the day when there were mainframe computers. And I remember writing my thesis one night, looking at that stack of cards thinking, I don't want to spend my life screwing around with computer models and writing white papers that will be read by 4 people, maybe 6 if we're lucky. It's not the world I want to be in. And I had been dabbling around with the camera when I went on my mountaineering trips and decided that that was a better path for me. And that was an outrageous and ridiculous thing to be thinking of at the age of 24 or 25, that suddenly I could be a professional photographer just because I happened to get a couple lucky pictures when I was on a climbing trip. but I did. And there's nothing quite like youthful brashness to help carry you along sometimes. But that's what led to the photo career, which was my main focus. And in some sense, it really still is my main focus and identity. I mean, I've been spending the past couple of years, several years actually, kind of pulling together and editing my whole, lifelong archive of images, doing a big book called The Human Element, which really is very intimately tied to the 2018 film, The Human Element. And so that's still in me and of me, the photography. But there have been times when I've been frustrated at the business conditions that surround photography. Louie will be no stranger to that. You're no stranger to that, Greg. But there are other times when it has felt like the filmmaking was the right path to go down. Chasing Ice really grew out of the still photography project, the time-lapse photography, looking at the changing landscapes. And the film was a natural manifestation of that work. So it's all connected. It's all about storytelling. It's all about visuals. And I just use whatever medium seems to make the most sense. And frankly, going into the future, I think the medium I want to work in is words. Somehow the words are calling to me. I've got a lot of words in my head, a lot of words that are already written down. And I think whatever I do next, it's actually not a visual project. I think it's a book of stories.
So Jennifer and Jim, it's so interesting to hear you talking about making that jump from academia to actually doing something in the field. And that story is so similar to a story that the Marine oceanographer, Enrique Salas tells. He says, I realized I was in the lab and I was basically writing the obituary of the ocean. And decided I needed to get out of the lab and do something about it. And so, what he has done is, help create all these marine protected areas around the world to help stem the state of the ocean degradation. So Louie, on to you. How all your past comes together as a filmmaker.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a photographer and a filmmaker and a writer. It's at different points. I feel like, there's the medium is, calls a little bit more, but I think Mark Twain said the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between the lightning and the lightning bug. And to me, the lightning is getting the viewer, the receiver of the information to create action, to get them to do something, right? It's like a normal Hollywood filmmaker, the audience is butts and seats. We're $10 in a box of popcorn. My North Star is how do you get people to change? And, there's something called neuroplasticity. I was talking to a neuro researcher on this last film I did, and he was saying that it takes about 90 minutes, not just to change the way people think, but to actually change the way that their brain processes information. And that's about 90 minutes is about what a film is. So, to me, it's like, how do you get the right words, the right images, the right story to create action? And when you get those together, it's lightning. And that's what's exciting about this medium. I mean, we're really in the communication arts, but I'm really in the, there's an author that said, like, politics is the way that we can manipulate our environment, and I'm focused in that. Like, how I got one life as far as I know to live. How can I use this best using all these assets? And it's not just me writing. I've got a great team of people, but but to create action so that when we've done a film, we feel like the world might not be better, but is slightly worse off than it would have been if we hadn't done a film. So I think that might answer your question.
Yeah. And Lucy, how have you tapped your past in theater as a DJ and even directing Blue's Clues in your filmmaking today?
Well, I think that bio is a tiny bit misleading because that's all true, but that was all kind of, well, was sort of juvenilia for sure. So my story is more like that. I was very academic, very much a polymath and incredibly academic and top of my class at Oxford, and got a BA, MA Oxford and a Fulbright scholarship to go to NYU Film School for grad school. And I'd had a decision in my last year at Oxford about, very much as we just heard with those other stories, I'm like, oh gosh, very similar. So I had a decision. I just didn't pursue a PhD, but I was kind of deciding between a PhD and academia and not, and kind of cashed in all my academic chips for a Fulbright scholarship to go to film school, which was a complete kind of, unexpected, back to square one. I'd never made a film before. I was the worst in my class at NYU grad film school. Just following my curiosity and realizing that academia, much as I found it completely fascinating, felt lonely and ineffectual. And also I like the collaborative nature of film. And I was sort of felt that, I was kind of perhaps afraid of being lonely in academia as a collaborator, or a producer, a creator, as well as in terms of how many people might actually read my academic inquiry. So coming to NYU was a real ticket for me, and I was always just incredibly broke. And I'd always directed theatre for fun. That had been what had given me the idea about film, and a real joy in that creative response to things. And when I was incredibly broken in New York, DJing was something I was incredibly passionate about, music, and had records and actually learned to DJ. And that was actually just a really good way of supporting myself, because I was always just unbelievably broke. And the brokest kind of person at film school was trying to support myself. And it was a fantastic thing. Same thing with Blue's Clues. I was just broke and needed a job, which a lot of my contemporaries at NYU didn't seem to. So when that opportunity came up, I was desperate to get that job, and I happened to be able to draw. So that was my first job, but that all happened before I was, that was all in my early 20s. So I think film school was tremendous for me. I had an incredible training and incredible peers at film school at NYU for years, and became just fascinated by documentary by following my curiosity. It wasn't a documentary program, it was a fiction program. Kept working. So I think, I've made a lot of films because I started really young and I had a lot of training, I think. And that training that I had at NYU was actually really well suited for documentary filmmaking, because we learned how to shoot, we learned how to record sound, we learned how to edit, we learned how to write, we learned how to work with actors. And when you work in documentary, I think of the people you're working with as kind of non-actors, but they're people that need to, support to be on camera. And that's, I think, what a director sort of is doing with talent, with participants. So I don't know, all these things. I feel incredibly lucky that I was brilliantly trained, and trained for a long time, and had scholarships, and pieced it together with Blue's Clues and DJing, which were incredibly fun kind of side hustles, honestly, and contributed to my kind of craft building. I absolutely use those skills, and had magnificent kind of good times building my skills doing those jobs. But those were real like cash gigs for the broke 20-something young filmmaker that I was.
Well, good. So the next question I have is this: what are some of the factors that determine whether or not you're going to spend your time on making a film? How do you decide that something is worthy of being made into a film? Jennifer, would you like to start that one out?
Sure. When I think back on we just finished a film which will be announced in a little while, and it's my 10th feature. And I was kind of like, God, maybe it's time to, again, it's my thing of, is it time to stop? But every film is a problem. Like every film is about a problem that I can't figure out, and I want to figure it out. and I'm fascinated by it. And, you know, to Lucy's point, I've been broke too. And our first film about Paul Bowles, we self-financed over 10 years. And it was only because that film won an Emmy and got, you know, some attention that we were then able to get financing to make our other films. And it's always been, as Ed says, you know, you guys just eat what you kill. You don't, you're not making money while you sleep. And I was like, I don't know how to make money while I sleep. Like basically we pay ourselves to do our work and then we move on to the next project. And that feels like, wow, I'm lucky because I'm doing work that I love. But it has to be a problem, and it has to be something that I can live with for between 2 and 5 years. I mean, Anthropocene came up when Ed and I were actually in Washington for the Watermark release. And we were walking along, you said, should we do another film together? And I said, well, why don't we tackle Anthropocene? Nobody knows what that word means. And they should. And at that time, that word was not in the vernacular at all. And people still, like we used to do these, you know, these tests, like we'd be in an audience and say, how many people know what that word means? And maybe 5 people would put their hands up. And then by the time the Anthropocene was released and we were actually in theaters, it was in the zeitgeist in a way, but just this, you know, trying to, as you say, Louie, create like real understanding, or that 90 minutes of changing the neuroplasticity in people's brains about the fact that we as a species now change all of the Earth's systems more than all other natural processes combined, is a massive idea. And it's something that we all need to know, right? So that those are the things that motivate me. The problem that is not immediately solvable, that's not immediately paraphrasable. Like if it can be paraphrased, it's not art. Like it kind of is the Kantian thing in itself. Like it has to be that thing. It is in that medium, and that medium is the way that this story is told. Those things, and that it has a potential of being cinematic, that it has a visual element to it. Film is visual. Film is visuals in time. So if you don't have the potential, either metaphorically or the potential for a rich visual language, I think it's not a good idea to make a film. Better write a book or do an essay or something else. So those are the things that motivate me.
And so Louie, how about you? How do you decide if a subject is worthy of being turned into a film? Oh, Louie, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. I definitely agree with Jennifer. I mean, it should be visual. I mean, I come at everything pretty much from a visual angle, but it's also like, what's the biggest problem that I think I can try to have a hand of solving? It's like, and what's going to keep me excited? You know, there's usually a gap of where I think culture is and where I want it to go. I mean, I know that sounds really arrogant, but that's what I'm trying to do, is to try to shape culture to a better end. You know, I mean, just about everything I've done is really about, you know, how do you inspire people to create action? And, you know, so, I mean, you look at everything that we're doing, it's like, you know, how do you solve, you know, people killing 23,000 dolphins a year in Japan for human consumption? You know, that's dropped over 90% since we did that film. It's about how do we solve the screwed up world just a little bit better. I mean, and make it just a little bit better. That's it. And then it's usually just I don't know if there's any kind of a formula, but it's like something that's like a passion that drives me to try to solve something I see as an injustice.
Okay. And Lucy, how about you? How do you decide whether a subject is worthy of being turned into a film?
Let's see if we can do video. Hello. Hi.
There you are.
I am here. I'm just on my phone, so who knows what what it looks like. But hey, I am so happy to see you, although I've been seeing you all along and you just haven't been seeing me. But what's remarkable about this amazing panel, because clearly, you know, we're in just the world's most amazing company of the filmmakers who inspire me to the max. I mean, this is my dream team that we're looking at right here. And I've got to say, when everyone was speaking, I was just nodding along. That's exactly right. I look for the thing that's going to be the best film, not magazine article or photo story or prayer or, you know, whatever. It's got to be a movie. It's got to be a documentary. I think of something that has to hold my attention because it's just so much work. And I look for something that's kind of the question I personally need to answer. I think the greatest privilege of my life is that with my projects, I'm just on a personal journey. This is my life's, you know, meaning making, is to understand that the world we're in. I mean, I kind of can't help myself. And for me, the challenge of not just understanding that the world we're in, but the challenge as an artist to tell the story of what I'm learning is just, you know, for me, I can't think of a better, you know, use of my time. And so it's just what I'm curious about. But I am always needing to raise money, and it also has to make sense that I'm doing the project. If someone else has done it already, great, I can just watch it. You know, it needs to be a contribution to the world. I'm very much about, you know, it being a meaningful contribution to the world. You know, that there's enough stuff out there, right? We're in a kind of universe of content overload, and there's just a fire hose. So if I want to put something out there, I think it's because it's the most valuable thing that I could ask an audience's time to spend watching. And so, yeah, what's going to make the most impact? What can I get financed? What am I the best filmmaker to do that no one else has done, that's actually a documentary that I can't stop thinking about? And also working with wonderful people is very important, that you trust with your life, because it is your life. Yeah.
Lucy, do you ever say, after you've seen a film, I could have done a better job?
All the time. All the time. All the time. It's a terrible thing. Yeah, no, I get twitchy and I'm like, oh, why didn't you just cut there, or just I want to look over there, or like, you know.
Well, has that ever been the impetus for you to do your own film?
No, because if someone else is, you know, actually it's kind of a cluster out there right now, and a lot of filmmakers seem to be chasing the same subjects, and I personally hate treading on people's toes creatively. There was a couple of other films about the fires, and I started first, and they kind of, like, because they had financing more easily, they kind of overtook me. But if they had started first, I wouldn't have touched them, because I sort of just feel respectful about other people's work and respecting the boundaries, and you know, I just feel it's really challenging as well, just in terms of financing. It was horrific for us in terms of financing Bring Your Own Brigade. When Ron Howard says he's making the film that you've been making for a while, that does not help. That's not a good day for your fundraising. Yeah. And so it's much, yeah, so no, but respectfully, because you know, no, I get upset when people take on subjects and don't do them justice, or don't get the story right. You know, I'm really I actually think that documentary filmmakers are tremendously generally, you know, I've learned about the world from my incredible peers. You know, that's how I best understand the world I'm in, by watching the films of my amazing colleagues. And I think there's incredible, like, accurate, authentic, mind-blowingly helpful work out there, and gorgeous and inspiring and important. but if something doesn't feel accurate or well researched or responsible or just poorly made on a subject that I'm care about, it does. I do get a little twitchy and think, I wish I'd made that one.
So Jim, how about you? How do you determine if a subject is worthy of you spending your time on turning it into a film?
I work from a place that I don't recommend anybody else work from.
And what is that?
It's a question of some sort of burning something deep in my unconscious that comes bubbling up out of the void. And then it connects with something in the outer world that needs to be addressed. And I still don't entirely understand some of the unconscious motivations, the psychological motivations that drove me into a lot of what I've worked on, either as a still photographer in book projects or in the cinematic world, going back 40 years. Some of the motivations are still a mystery to me, but in any event, they led into these connections in the outer world. And once you get into the outer world, then you have to deal with all the complications, for better or for worse, usually for worse, of how you're going to fund this stuff, how you're going to organize these things, how do you make it happen? And I would have to say, I think it's the curse of my life that I've had to spend as much time as I have worrying about the economics of these things. It's just miserable, in my view, to do all the fundraising, to just go through the endless decision tree of ifs, ands, and buts. If this force comes in, then we're going to have this. And if that force comes in, we'll have that. And then neither one of them come in and you have to go look for more funding or whatever. It's a horrible process in my experience. There are many people who enjoy it more than I do. And most of those people are salesmen in big corporations who really like that wheeling and dealing, but it's not for me. But yet that's an unavoidable part of the process. It's not creative. It's all sales oriented, and it's just the way it is. Anyway, I'm getting off track. The point is, I have to be really passionate about it. It has to be firing my unconscious somewhere, somehow, for some reason, and that leads to everything else sooner or later.
Thank you, Jim. So we're kind of winding down here, but one question I have for all of you is that one solution to tackling climate change is for everyone to take action. And we saw that in the IPCC report. So how do you get environmental films to audiences who aren't already in the choir, so to speak, so that they might get an understanding of the issue? Let's start off with Jennifer, you again.
Okay, so that's interesting because it goes back. I just read this thing. I don't know who wrote it in The Guardian about if we all turned down our thermostats by 1 degree, we would not need Russian oil. And I thought, wow, okay, yeah, that's interesting right now. Why are we in the middle of this war? We're in this is a war about oil. It's about those resources. And I think when I said in the beginning that being revelatory rather than accusatory, I feel like, and this is something that the whole reason I was drawn to Bratinsky's work in the very beginning was because of the fact that his work it witnessed these places, and I've said this before, but that we're responsible for, but would never normally see, right? And we continued that into the medium of film, where actually the whole dialectic of scale and detail that would happen when you were standing in front of one of Ed's photographs, one of which is behind me, that's from Watermark, that's the Colorado River Delta, that's the ocean trying to reach the river, which has died when it crosses the border into Mexico because it's been so dammed in the US. But anyway, that act of looking at a photograph and going in and seeing the details that look like little dots, but they're people, and then pulling out. We could do that in time in film. We could. The scale has no meaning without detail, right? So to me, it's always about a moving back and forth between those two things. But if you are accusatory, then you are preaching to the choir. There's a whole bunch of people who just won't even listen to you. They won't even listen to that message. So the question is, if you could sort of entice people in, and this was certainly the project with the 3 films we did with Ed, entice them in with the beautiful, sometimes, you know, incomprehensible visuals, like, what am I looking at? And how big is that thing? And what is it? And then you're kind of hooked. And then you realize what you're looking at. And then you realize that what you're looking at is in some way your responsibility. It's a different process than the direct one. But I think it also works. And so, you know, bringing up Anthropocene again, we took that to the limit that we could take it in every visual medium that worked, in photography, in installation, in film, in educational material, and tried to use the best medium to be able to affect that process in the viewer. And as Lucy says, that movement towards empathy, the feeling that you're outside of something and you're looking at it, and then realizing that you're involved, and then what that does to a sense of responsibility and empathy. I think, you know, if it only takes 90 minutes to change your neurological pathways, then that would be the way that I think I would most choose to try to do that.
Okay, and Louie, how about you? How do you get beyond just the choir listening to the subjects of your films? Oh, Louie, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. I think we always start with that. Like, how do you, you know, the choir is like not our market. You know, just coming through the back door of humor, you know, arresting visuals, again, like Jennifer was saying, you know, something that takes you by surprise. You want to, you know, hook people with like Lucy was saying, like a great, you know, narrator or a subject that you can empathize with. You know, the science shows that people don't change their opinion, their beliefs by what they think. They do it by what they feel. And then they rationalize that, hey, this is how I think, so I'm going to act this way. But it's really their feelings. So we're trying to get people's, you know, I construct a film, you know, like boot camp, like an emotional boot camp. You know, break down people's beliefs on what they think is true, and then come at it through an empathetic character, and then they can see the world through their point of view, and then they start to change.
And certainly, like Jennifer, you're using multiple platforms too, because if you're projecting on buildings, you know, you are touching audiences who might not even be aware of what it is you're covering. Yeah, I mean, like, you know, Netflix will never give you the, you know, the exact numbers of what, you know, how well your film's doing, but you know, you can get you know, I know that we can reach orders of magnitude more people with the projection events. Like when we projected, you know, Jim's visuals on the United Nations, we were getting, you know, literally, you know, billions of media views, and that's exciting because and then you're not like trying to entice people to go see a film. They're seeing it on social media. The media's there. People are covering it. You know, like when we did Endangered Species on the Vatican, I think there was 600 media outlets there. You know, it's the penetration is far more reaching than any film will do, even like a blockbuster film. So that's what's exciting. How do you use, you know, the work that everybody's doing? And this isn't just my work we're doing. We're using, you know, a lot of photographers, a lot of cinematographers. How do you use their work to try to use that same process? Okay. And Lucy, how about you?
So wonderful listening to everybody. You know, for me, I suppose I've always trusted the quality, honestly, and that may be because I've often come from a place of not having huge partners or huge budgets. It's always been quite a struggle to do things, and perhaps therefore it's consolation to say this, but I'm not sure it might be the right answer as well, which is that, you just have to trust that if you do the very best possible thing, then that will land, you know, on somebody. And I'm so thrilled that when sometimes my films may not have had such big audiences, you know, when they've made a big impact on individuals. And so, for example, my film Wasteland, it's a documentary in Portuguese about garbage, right? And thank goodness it was wonderful, and the people in it were wonderful enough. I think their stories were wonderful enough, and the whole team made such a wonderful film that we got distribution, and that it had a big impact and was nominated and this kind of thing. But I've been so grateful for festivals actually like DC Environmental Film Festival that I think are really showcasing the best work, and everyone just fighting to reach both the choir and other people. And I don't know what else to do, but, you know, one at a time, although I, you know, would love to have billions of impressions sometime. And I think that's incredible and good on you. And I must say also, though, I will say that it's pretty wild with the streamers. Actually, Netflix has given me some numbers for some of the stuff that I've made for them. And that does boggle me, like 190 countries and how many households. And for me, that's been a scale that has dazzled me in terms of what impact we can have in this world now as well. So I just guess I just keep going, and the landscape keeps changing about how you reach people. But I also sort of trust myself and think, if I'm interested in something, if it's landing on some people, then I hope that those ripples, you know, are of benefit. You know, I'm just doing the best I can. I don't know.
And Jim, how about you?
Well, look, we'd all love to change the world, but there are very, 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 very few people out of the almost 8 billion people on this planet that truly can change the world. And one of them sitting in the Kremlin right now, as we know. But you know, that level of power is given to almost no one. And I don't want to give him that power actually either. But nevertheless, the point is that we would like, as idealists, as artists, we would like to change the world, but there is a fraction of the world that basically is unchangeable. We're speaking to the converted for the most part, no matter what the medium is. And what we're trying to do is peel off a relatively few psyches from the middle of the spectrum that maybe can be peeled out of the denier side of the spectrum and turned into people who say, oh, okay, I didn't quite realize that. I understand that now, and so forth. So to get to those folks, you just use every platform you have. I'm terrible at social media. I don't have any interest in it. I don't do it. I have somebody who does it for me once in a while. I work with the media that I have. Unfortunately, social media is the big number medium of our time, and it's just kind of the way it is. And it ain't my world, never will be. But I know how to do books. I know how to do exhibitions. I know how to give multimedia presentations and try and influence influential people when I have the chance to be with them at dinner. And so that's it. You know, once again, back to what I said earlier, I do what I can with the tools I have. And I think I said that somewhere right around the end of Chasing Ice, which came out of me spontaneously next to a glacier in Iceland. Well, it's still there 15 years later.
Yeah. All right, everyone. I've got one last question. And if you could share with us what your next project is. It can be a teaser, and I think, Jennifer, you kind of alluded to something. So you go for it.
All I can say is that it involves global insect collapse, another comedy from Mercury Films about global insect collapse. That's the latest one that we've been working on.
All right, and Lucy, how about you?
I have been deep in the world of the therapeutic niches of psychedelic medicines. And I have two projects in that world, a doc series and a one-off that I've been really fascinated. The potential to use psychedelic medicines for healing is really dear to my heart, and obviously really exploding in the zeitgeist with the psychedelic renaissance, so-called, that seems to be happening. And all this incredible research and also awareness of, so there's new research and there's also, I think, new awareness of ancient indigenous use as well. And so it's been really fascinating to work in this area. Again, another gift that I get to explore something that's been actually a lifelong sort of passion and curiosity and real medicine for me, actually, since I was a teenager, I would say. And possibly even what tuned me into the natural world and these big themes that we're exploring in our work was that I was given psychedelics as a teenager. And one of the actual, you can study this scientifically, there's a scientific questionnaire. And one of the things that psychedelic medicine, such as say psilocybin, magic mushrooms, will do is increase your connection with the natural world. So it's possible that that's not an unconnected subject area. In fact, there's a questionnaire about how psychedelics affect you, and connectedness with nature is one of the key questions that you can see kind of before and after differentials in. It's kind of interesting.
So that certainly ties in that earlier question that I asked about how all your past influences your filmmaking. So, but thank you for sharing that background. And so, Louie, on to you. What is your next thing?
I've got a bunch of things. We have a production company, so we're doing a series on the future of food, plastic pollution solutions. A scientist who's researcher who's reversing early stage Alzheimer's. We're doing one on palm oil production in the Loser ecosystem in northwestern Sumatra. Doing a film on 4 female surfers who got pay parity in the sport of big wave surfing. And then I'm doing an ocean still project, going around with a still camera and photographing the still best preserved reefs in the world. So we have a baseline, hopefully with what we're not going to lose.
So Louie, as always, there's a lot of variety in what it is you do. And Jim, what is your next project, if you can share that?
Well, as I alluded to earlier, I'm still following that essential artist's stimulation and catalyst of what's boiling around in my unconscious, and trying to kind of hook a little piece of that and turn that into whatever's coming next. But as I also said, I'm reasonably confident it's a work in words, and it will continue to be digging into questions of the Anthropocene as I have been for a number of years now. So that's the pathway that I see opening up. I would still say that I'm trying to do a little bit of sort of recharging of the batteries right at the moment, and I'm not in any enormous hurry to get started again. I just need to kind of fill the battery some more. But there's definitely something still out there calling to me. In fact, at about 3 o'clock in the morning last night, this phrase came through my head, and I said, that's the title of the new book. And I actually told that to one of my associates here in the office this morning, and she said, that is perfect. That is the best one of the 200 you've come up with in the past several years. So it's already there waiting to get at me. So I'll leave it at that. I'm not telling you what it is.
All right, everyone, we are out of time. This has been a wonderful conversation. I feel like I've gotten a graduate degree here from all of you. So I want to thank you all, Jennifer Baichwal, Louie Psihoyos, James Balog, and Lucy Walker, for this conversation that's part of the forum in honor of the Environmental Film Festival as it celebrates 30 years of sharing films to Washington, D.C. and to the world. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank
and
you.
thank you to the film festival. Really amazing the amazing film festival. And thanks also to the amazing moderator. Really, what a joy. I just want to gush a little bit. Thank you. It's just
All
a
right.
real privilege to be here.
Good. All right,
Congratulations.
so long, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.